Please welcome from the Media Research Center, the group responsible for proving Jonathan Karl is really wrong here, is Dan Gaynor. And, of course, race car driver and founder of GOP USA, Bobby Eberle. Dan, let's get to you first. MSNBC had an interview with Joe Biden. Mika Brzezinski finally asked him some legitimate questions. I'm not sure she pushed actually far enough, but she went further than I ever expected her to go, Dan.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to give Mika some props. I mean, yes, the show certainly did a little CYA talking about how they covered Kavanaugh better than some in the press. And, well, okay, they had some fair points to make on that. Then they bashed Trump some. But when they got to interviewing, Biden, Mika put him on the hot seat much more than I thought she was going to. And in ways, it just didn't play out well for him. It's certainly from a PR situation, the Biden camp had to be going, why the heck did we do this? They went to Scarborough, because Scarborough, there's no show in the world except for maybe Reliable Sources that hates Trump more than Morning Joe. And yet they weren't friendly to Biden either. So, the Biden camp's got to be wondering, why did we do this?
Yeah, and so I'm with you, Dan, because I am one of the first to bash Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski when it comes to their handling of issues like this. And she went way further than I ever thought she was going to go. And props to her for that. I wonder what the motivation is here, though. And Bobby Eberle, I'm going to ask you, do you think there is a possibility that the elites in the Democratic Party are now realizing Joe Biden is a complete disaster? We're going to see the media now follow the Democratic elites' moves here and start pushing this. So lo and behold, when the convention comes around, maybe just maybe some other candidate on a white horse can run in and save the Democratic Party from the disaster that is Joe Biden, Bobby.
Right. Yeah, Grant, that's a great question, because the Democrats, the leadership, the political leadership, they always are lockstep with the media. Right. And so now they're in this quandary, because what are you going to do with Joe Biden? Because the point Dan just made, you guys, he went on MSNBC. He was pushed a little bit. He still stumbled. He still babbled. He was caught off guard. That's MSNBC. What if this story keeps going and he has to do more legitimate news sources when he can't even handle MSNBC? If he's going to go on CNN Reliable Sources and end up doing the same thing, what's he going to do with the bigger networks? With Fox News, which he's going to have to talk to sometime. This leadership is in a quandary because they pushed Joe Biden. They didn't want Bernie Sanders because he's a full-on socialist. But now they've got Joe Biden, who is totally damaged goods. He can't even speak properly on issues like the Declaration of Independence that people should know about. Now he's got these allegations, and you saw with what could only be called a softball interview. Yeah, she did ask some good questions, but what an environment to kind of make your debut on answering these questions, on addressing this issue, and he failed. So what's he going to do on the bigger stage as this keeps going?
And I think Joe Biden's biggest problem was that he failed there. I mean, he had no answers to this, which then makes you think, who the heck is he surrounding himself with? They've got to prepare him for these types of questions, Dan. And you talk about the Washington Post covering this story. The New York Times, Joe Biden the other day said the New York Times vindicated him. The New York Times comes out and says, no, we didn't vindicate anybody. In fact, we've made no conclusions of whether these are real or not. So now you add the Post, the Times, and MSNBC turning on Joe Biden. He's in big trouble.
Yeah. Now, I will heavily fault the New York Times because they didn't cover it. They covered it up. They waited 19 days to do this big investigation, and then they didn't have the key thing that The Intercept went and found, which was that Tara Reade's mom had gone on Larry King, called anonymously into Larry King, and said she had a problem with a prominent senator. Contemporaneous evidence, I think the lawyers call it, basically evidence from that time, which makes it more credible. So I mean, yes, the media haven't covered this great, but now they are covering it. Now instead of the blackout for Tara Reade, was the only inquiry she's getting from Fox, suddenly she's hearing from all the major networks. They all got to talk about it. And yeah, I mean, certainly Democrats, Bobby's right, Democrats have in a tough spot. They pushed Bernie Sanders away. So if they try to make any move to encourage Biden to step aside, they get stuck with Bernie Sanders before the convention. And after the convention, well, they're already into August. And yes, the party apparatchiks can then pick whoever they want, Andrew Cuomo. But About that point, they're almost into September. There's not a lot of time to campaign.
Here's the strategy behind it all from the Democrats' perspective, okay? We know that they are fully willing to eat their own if it comes to the point where they think they're going to lose. They will go after their own. There's no doubt about that. By canceling some of these primaries like they did in New York, and Dan mentioned Andrew Cuomo, what happens? Bernie Sanders is unable to pick up even a few delegates, which then gives him less power at the convention. And Bernie Sanders, with less power at the convention, gives the party elite all the power. And certainly they can do with that power whatever they want. And I would not count out at this moment, Bobby Everly, the fact that Andrew Cuomo, which to me is the only candidate that would even stand a chance against President Trump right now, to come riding in.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, whose press conferences get covered, right? President Trump's and Andrew Cuomo's. He's on the news all the time. They're covering him all the time. They're writing stories about him. And it's almost like he's number one on the bench. They're waiting for him. Because like you said, with these primaries being canceled, who knows, with the momentum that Biden had, Bernie Sanders probably wouldn't win these other contests, but it could show a trend. If Biden's failing, if these sexual assault allegations are gaining steam, you'd see it in the Bernie Sanders output, the turnout, the results. That gives him more power at the convention. That gives him more leverage. Instead, we're kind of in no man's land, waiting on someone like Andrew Cuomo that they might anoint as the successor to a very damaged Biden.
Yeah, well, guys, you've been coming on the last few weeks, and I so appreciate it. We've been calling the segment media malpractice. As a slam to CNN, we ought to call it calling out unreliable sources, because that's what the mainstream media has amounted to, is unreliable sources, and the people are not getting the information. But that, folks, is what we are here for. Dan Gaynor, Bobby Everly, both pleasure having you on. Thank you so much. Enjoy your Saturday.